Paris Agreement has a little clause that says that it should be followed up upon every 5 years. So this was that 5-year follow-up point, which meant that it was a bit of a bigger conference than the other 4 years would have been. So we were really lucky to get to attend this particular year. And especially post-COVID, it was a really massive conference. There were about 30,000 people who attended, representing basically every country. So it was really cool to be there. Let's see if I can, there we go. I guess I talked about this already. This year, the conference was in Glasgow. So the 5 of us high schoolers traveled to Glasgow. We all had parents with us, and we were there for a little bit over a week. Sophie and I attended the conference for 5 days. Lily and Charlotte went for 4 days because they went to a protest the last day. But that's sort of all the background you need. The group that we went with was called 7 Generations Ahead, and some of you may be familiar with them. I'm not sure whether you are. It's a nonprofit. It's actually based here in Oak Park, but it extends much further than just the Oak Park area. It's sort of a whole like Cook County, Midwest, huge sustainability nonprofit. And they do a lot of counseling work with schools or businesses who want to make themselves more sustainable. And what they also have is a youth group called It's Our Future, which is the group that all 4 of us are members of. And that was how we were able to go to this conference. It's Our Future selected us as their members to go over to Scotland and represent them at this conference. So it was a really, really lucky opportunity that we were able to go. Here is the 5 of us. So Ali is the second from the right, and he's the only one of us who wasn't able to make it. In Scotland together with a delegate from the Kingdom of Tonga, which was really cool to be able to speak to him. But there's just a little overview of things, and I will let us get into the details. So Sophie, you want to give us some conclusions?
Okay, we're going to start with like a broad overview of the main takeaways we had after leaving the conference. So first of all, we all noticed a lack of representation within the actual negotiation rooms. So the way the conference was formatted, there were certain areas you were allowed in or not allowed in based on what qualifications you had. So the areas where they were actually debating this policy, for example, younger activists like us or other people were not allowed into those rooms. And if they were, it was just to watch, not to participate in any way, as well as Indigenous people, because they're technically not like a part of any country delicacy. They're not allowed to be participating in these negotiations, which they should be a part of. And then second of all, the pledges at the conference fell short of their 1.5 degrees Celsius or under goal. So the whole point of the conference was to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius. And by the end of the conference, the goals would only put us at 1.8 degrees Celsius, assuming every single country followed through on exactly what they were said they were going to do by the time they said they would do it. So an example of a pledge that a country would make, over 200 countries got together and pledged to reverse illegal deforestation by 2030, and also to reduce methane emissions by about 30%, I think. And then because we saw so much inaction at this global level, it made us all realize the importance of taking local action and emphasizing to like our school boards and local governments that climate action really has to start from the ground up, because it's so hard to make legislation that encompasses everyone in the world. And then also the importance of individual actions, and some suggestions we've been giving are to start eco-friendly habits, but don't get stressed out about them and worry about being a perfect environmentalist, eating fewer animal products, getting involved in an environmental group, and just going outside.
So now into some of the international representation that we saw at the conference. So the world leaders were there just for, I believe, the first 3 or 4 days of the conference, and then they went back to their respective countries. So it was pretty interesting having them there because, for example, like even more of those, the rooms where the important discussions were being happened, those were like extra closed off when the world leaders were there for like security purposes. So on the left, we put some of the people who were there. Biden, of course, was there. It was nice to see America being at COP after not being there in previous years because Trump was president. Boris Johnson was also there, of course, because it's the UK. It was interesting, actually, his speech on one of the first days. He seemed to say a lot of good things, but of course, he has to act in the right ways as well. But we thought that was interesting. We also included Malala here. She's not a world leader, but we just really liked her, so we added her. And then on the right, I put the world leaders of China and Russia and Brazil, none of which came to COP26. So that was disheartening to see a lot of world leaders of like pretty big countries that had pretty big emissions not coming to make an effort to change. Then we also attended a few panels at the conference, which was pretty interesting. We actually didn't realize that panels were open to us until like the third day. But we spent one day where we just went to like 3 panels in a row because we wanted to learn a lot. So we went to a World Wildlife Fund panel where they presented to us about their opinions on COP and also what work they were doing. So that was really fascinating to hear their points of view. And it was really cool to see people who were like, I feel like you always hear about World Wildlife Fund, but I've never actually seen anyone who represents them. So I thought that was really cool. And then after that, we went to a panel that was titled Financing a More Resilient World. And that was in the plenary, which was the more higher security area. And it was in this really huge room where a lot of delegates were. So that was really cool. And they talked a lot about, there were people there that were talking about from small island states who were talking about how they thought that it would be good for more finances to be lent to them so that they could become more sustainable. And there were 2 different panels for that. And then the final panel we went to was for youth climate activism, which was really cool because the previous panels that we had gone to were very serious. And so it was, and this one was serious as well, but it was nicer to be with people who didn't use such hard to understand vocabulary and just talked about activism. And it was cool to be somewhere where we were surrounded by people our age.
Awesome. So on that note, COP really succeeded in providing a space for global youth activists to get together. Obviously, seeing as though everyone's coming from all over the world, it was a space for people who probably would have never interacted in a face-to-face setting to really delve into the intersectionality of the climate crisis and share all of our experiences, the good and bad and the ugly, with not only like the extent of the crisis at hand, but also organizing efforts. We met some really awesome folks. Speaking of the youth-centered panel that we went to, soon afterwards, we attended a youth group of sorts where we kind of just talked about the pressures of youth activism and what it's like to be in such an adult-dominated space. And it was really, really exciting and really just meaningful to be, again, surrounded by folks who really understand the crisis from such a unique perspective. And then on the right, Sophie and I got the chance to meet 2 organizers who were really, really awesome and definitely, like, I don't entirely know how to phrase it, celebrities in like the youth climate justice world. Leah Thompson and Shea Bastida, who Leah Thompson actually runs the platform Intersectional Environmentalist, which has over 400,000 followers on Instagram, and just like really awesome stuff. We got the opportunity to speak with them and actually interviewed them for our piece with One Earth Film Festival. So that was a really amazing experience. Awesome. So in addition to just meeting folks, we had the opportunity to participate in various demonstrations throughout the conference, many of which were facilitated by Fridays for Future, which was pretty much like the dominating youth organizing group who attended COP. There were chapters from all around the world, which was really, really amazing to see. So we had the opportunity to meet Louisa Neuberger, who is sort of coined as, I think it was Germany's Greta Thunberg, which was really awesome. But what was really disheartening about some of the demonstrations, especially the one on the right, which we all had the opportunity to participate in, was that folks who facilitated the conference were definitely very particular about how the demonstration was to be run, and like how loud we would be, and like how many people were involved, and just like the time length to which we were expressing our deep concern for what's at hand, to the point where the folks who were organizing the demonstration were threatened to be debadged and thrown out of the conference if it didn't adhere to what the COP26 folks were saying. But otherwise, it was really, really amazing to see these folks, and yeah. And then definitely a key part of this was activism outside the conference. So to preface, so many folks who should have been able to attend the conference, especially activists from the Global South, were denied a presence, not only from price gouging, but vaccine apartheid and numerous other factors that the UN should have gotten on top of. But activism outside of the conference definitely served as an opportunity for folks who weren't there, in addition to activists who did attend COP, to really rally around like the radical demands that we so desperately need. So just like the amount of folks that showed up and the passion that was there was really, really amazing. We had the opportunity to see a ton of people speak, and it was really just such an amazing opportunity, and really just being there was a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm saying that a lot.
And then outside of the main action zone that we've talked a lot about, there was something called the Green Zone, which was inside of a science museum. And that was the more interactive, it was open to more people. And you just learned a lot about various things with the climate. So we put on VR headsets and like could explore the world through VR, which was very cool. We talked to a lot of different people with different expertises and different booths on things like clean energy and electric vehicles. On the left here, we have a picture of an Arctic ice core. So they had a room with ice from the Arctic, which is very cool. And then on the right, this was actually offsite on a like free, open to the public area. It was a display of vertical hydroponic farming, which is an alternative to growing plants in the ground, which takes up a lot of space and more resources. With hydroponic farming, the plants are growing in a teeny amount of soil, and then at the bottom, it's just all water. And there's these complex systems of nutrients and harvesting, and it was all very automated, and we learned a lot about it, and it was very cool and colorful.
And then our second to last slide is a little out of theme with the other ones, but it's my personal favorite. A really cool part about being at COP, which was just super surreal, was being able to see so many people that, you know, you've only seen in images before. So our very first day in the blue zone, which was sort of the main like news policy zone, we saw Bill Gates, which is that photo on the left, which was just like, it was one of my favorite moments from the conference. Not because I'm all that into Bill Gates. I mean, I guess he's a philanthropist, which is good. But more just because it was such a like moment of, I don't know, realization, like, wow, I'm actually here. This is so cool. Like, look at all of these important people who are participating in this conference alongside me. So it was just like a really fun, exciting moment. The photo in the middle, you might recognize Prince William, who was also at the conference. He spoke one day and gave out some awards. So I don't think any of us were actually there when he walked by, but one of the 7 generations ahead folks who we went with was there and got this photo, which is pretty crazy how close he was. And then the one on the right is a photo of Al Gore, who Sophie and I saw speak in the greatest presentation either of us has ever seen. He gave his climate reality presentation, and it was like absolutely incredible. It was so cool. I did the climate reality training, obviously, but I did it online. And so when I did it, it just wasn't half as moving as it was to see it in person. And I mean, I've never been to an in-person climate reality training, but I would imagine that the energy was similar to how it was at this COP presentation, because you're in a room full of people who are really passionate and involved in the climate. And so it was just like such a cool audience to be with and such a fabulous presentation. So Al Gore was our other sort of celebrity sighting. But that is most of what we have to say. I think our overall conclusions were that, you know, we're happy that we're headed now on a path to 1.8 degrees of warming rather than 2.7, but we'd still like to be headed for somewhere below 1.5 degrees, obviously, because that's sort of our critical tipping point. And so to be above 1.5 is not where we want to be, especially because I don't think we all have all that much faith in some of the agreements that these countries have made. But we can also say definitely that the conference was an absolutely like life-changing thing to attend. It was so cool to be surrounded by such an international community and to hear people talk on so many different specific topics. There was just so much knowledge in this one event center. So it was a really awesome experience. I don't know if any of the rest of you, the three of you, want to say something else on closing.
Yeah, again, such an amazing experience, and I'm so grateful to have attended. I mean, what really sort of resonated with me towards the end of the conference was really just acknowledging that youth will be the ones to eradicate this crisis, and the vast majority of older folks in positions of power do not speak for us and probably never will. But really highlighting the presence of youth is absolutely key to approaching this crisis in the most intersectional way possible. And also having those in leadership, having those at the forefront of this crisis in positions of leadership is, again, the only way we can go about this crisis in the most intersectional way possible. So not only youth, but Indigenous organizers, BIPOC folks, actors from the Global South, et cetera, deserve a spot at like the highest level negotiation tables, if not running them. So yeah.
Sophie or Charlotte, do either of you want to say anything else?
Yeah, I'll say I really had my hopes up at the beginning of the conference because by Wednesday there was already the deforestation pledge, which had gotten more than 100 countries signed on to it. And the methane pledge had also gotten a lot of countries signed on to it by Wednesday. And ultimately it was pretty disheartening to see the final deal not be enough. But I would say that my biggest takeaway was how like being with all of these activists from around the world was really inspiring. And I thought it was really cool how strong a sense of solidarity there was. So that was really powerful, and it made me see that even if things aren't going right completely, we do have the power to make things better.
Yeah, I would just emphasize everything that everyone else has already said. And I think when we talked to the representative from the Kingdom of Tonga, we asked him, like, what's your advice to youth in the climate movement? And he told us, like, just to talk to each other and look at each other, like having that human connection. And I think that was what I appreciated most about the conference, was having these, like, seeing people from all over the world and connecting with all of them over one issue.
If there's not one more takeaway. Just understanding that we are not at fault for this crisis, and so often large corporations and the elite few have tried to make it so that we as consumers feel that we bear all the weight for each and every aspect of the climate crisis, when that is simply not true. So acknowledging that is absolutely crucial, and I think that it takes a lot of weight off of our shoulders, and it's definitely a key to really mobilizing together. So thank you.
Okay, we have some questions. You want to end the share screen and, or maybe you already did. Okay, I think you did. We've got a few questions in the chat. Please ask more. I had a couple things I wanted to ask you. You're all graduating seniors. What are each of you planning for next year?
I can go first. I'm not sure yet where I'm going to be going. It looks like I'll end up either in sort of the northeastern US or in Canada, so we'll see. And I'm going to be doing a double major in earth sciences and computer sciences.
Okay, what about the others?
I'm also not sure where I'll be attending yet, but I'm definitely majoring in environmental science.
Okay, Sophie?
Yeah, I will be attending university. I don't know where yet, but I'll be majoring in international relations with a focus in like environmental studies, and then hopefully get an environmental law degree.
Great. And Lily?
I will also be attending college, and I believe I'll be majoring in, I don't necessarily know yet, but definitely something surrounding sociology, environmental studies with a focus on regenerative agriculture. And also for environmental sciences, definitely more the policy track than the science track. But yeah.
Okay, we've got several questions. If there was one thing about the conference you could have changed if you were in charge, what would it have been? Anybody?
I've
I
heard.
feel like we would. Oh, Sophie, you go.
I was gonna say something. I don't know if you're gonna say the same thing, but I've heard you talk a lot about systems of accountability for the agreements made at these conferences. So not just talking about what you're going to do, but laying it out, having plans and steps, and then a way to make sure that the countries are actually doing what they say they're going to be doing.
So you felt that there was not that accountability written into it? Okay, anybody have other thoughts?
Yeah, similar to my takeaways, making it so that these spaces are much more accessible than they actually were. There is definitely a presence of sort of youth washing at the conference where like youth activists or organizers were, I mean, definitely being highlighted for being there, but whether or not what they were saying was actually being valued, if not integrated into legitimate policy, was very questionable. Also, again, similar to one of my takeaways, making it so that those at the forefront of this crisis are leading these spaces, seeing as though they have an innate connection with like the land that I know I will never have the privilege to experience. So yeah, definitely that.
Okay, we had a question. Someone wanted to hear a little bit more about the demonstrations outside and what was emphasized there, what the speakers were talking about.
That's my question. I don't know if you can put the slide up again about the protests, but the one in particular in the upper right corner, I'm just very curious what was going on there with the people in the yellow jackets that were boxed around people. I don't know if you guys know about what was happening there, but it was very interesting.
Yes, I chose that image. I have the story surrounding that. So I went to the big climate strike on Friday. And I was separated from Lily, who was also attending. So I made friends with this other girl who was also alone at the strike. And we just started talking about our experiences and what attending COP had been like for us. And she actually didn't have access to going into the conference like I did. She had just been participating in different protests. Jelena, I think it's actually that activism outside the conference slide. Yeah, perfect. So that one on the top right. So my new friend told me about how on Wednesday she had been at this protest with Extinction Rebellion, and they had this plan. I believe they're going to march up to the blue zone area, and they were just marching around Glasgow, and the police, as you can see, boxed them in. And I can't remember how long it was for, but I believe it was a few hours that they were there and they couldn't get out. And I just thought that was really troubling, so that's why I included that image.
Do you feel that your goals have changed at all as a result of being at the conference?
I feel like I don't know if mine have actually. I think I learned a lot overall, but I feel like I was already fairly set in like the things that I think need to be prioritized in terms of action. And since the conference was like it taught me a lot, but it sort of taught me that every action that people were speaking on has value. And so I didn't feel any like reason why the things that I already prioritized should change. And so I don't feel like my own mindset changed all that much just because everything I learned was sort of supporting this idea that I already have that like our climate is in trouble and these are solutions that work. And so then the ones that I just sort of have over time like learned more about and become more connected with are still probably the ones that I would prioritize the most. And I feel like that would be the same for the other three, but I don't know if any of you guys want to say anything else.
Yeah, I would say that's mainly the same for me. The only thing about my goals that changed were that it was really interesting to be in a different country and see the activism there because I noticed that the American activist movement and the global activist movement seem to be very disconnected. Because Fridays for Future is the leading activism organization for most of the countries that we saw there, but there's not that big of a Fridays for Future presence, especially in Chicago and in America in general. So that really changed, I think, my goals about activism because I want American activism to be more united with the global climate activism. But I would say that's the only opinion and goal of mine that really changed drastically.
Okay, you didn't mention the fossil fuel companies that were represented there by literally hundreds of people. How do you feel about that, and what impact do you think it had?
I can speak to that a little bit. Also, tie back to the question about the protests and what a lot of the organizers were speaking to the entire crowd was the presence of polluters and fossil fuel billionaires and those representing them at the conference, because at the end of the day, they have no place there. I mean, definitely not. I mean, yes, of course they do, but not in the sense of promotion, whereas it should have been accountability and responsibility for knowing about this crisis for far too long and not doing anything about it and continuing to perpetuate everything that they're doing currently. I mean, from pipelines in the US to oil spills to virtually everything, they hold such immense power, especially within our government. So it's interesting to see sort of the, like, I don't know, the interactions between world leaders and those, I mean, those who say that they represent us and who speak for the urgency that we have so clearly displayed, and how behind closed doors they continue to sort of, this might be a little bit aggressive, but bow at the feet of those who have money. So yeah, and I think that a lot of youth organizers really understand that. And it's really only a matter of time until, I don't know, we make it clear that like, we won't stand for this.
Like going off of that, there were tons of companies, fossil fuel companies, companies like Unilever, these giant polluters that are like doing the most harm to the world. And they were kind of there not to like learn from the conference and see the wrongs of their ways and make huge changes in the future. What I saw was they had these like little booths that'd be like, look at the 2% of our business that is sustainable. And they were bragging about that when like they're the ones causing all of these issues. So I I think it, like Lily said, they needed to be there, but not for the reason that they were there.
Any other reactions?
I think Charlotte and I did another presentation where we got a really similar question. And we actually both said that it was like a little bit alarming almost that we didn't feel like we had felt the presence of the fossil fuel companies that strongly. For those of you who don't know, had the fossil fuel companies all been one delegation, they would have been the largest delegation at COP. And so there were obviously quite a number of fossil fuel lobbyists who were attending the conference. But I didn't really feel like I saw that, which is why I say it was a little alarming because like I don't know what sort of subtle ways these people were hiding themselves and sort of like inserting themselves into conversations when I didn't even realize it. So I feel like it's almost more interesting that I didn't feel as aware of their presence as I probably should have, since there were so many fossil fuel representatives there. So that's just sort of interesting. I don't really know what it means, but
Yeah, to add on to that, I didn't even know that there were fossil fuel lobbyists there, like at all, until I got back to the conference, which was just like, it's just really scary to think about.
Someone had commented that there were activists from the global south who were outside but not represented well inside. Could you talk a little more about that? Why were they not represented inside?
I think Lily was talking a little bit earlier about the lack of accessibility, but I'd say that that's basically why they weren't represented inside, is because it was really hard to get into the conference. Like we were lucky enough to be going with a nonprofit, and so all of the application work and stuff was done for us. So like the five of us were just sort of along for the ride, but there's a really intense application process. That has to be done about a year ahead of time so that you can be like pre-approved. And it was really expensive to go to Glasgow, which wouldn't be as related to if people were literally standing outside the venue, but if people were figuratively outside the venue, that could be another reason why, just because it was really pricey. Like the hotels were expensive because everyone was trying to come to the same city at the same time. The flights were expensive. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's where the lack of adequate representation comes from, is just because the conference was really hard to get to. So yeah, and like Sophie was saying with, wait, sorry, was one of you?
Go on.
Like Sophie was saying with the indigenous people, I think, yeah, because they're not representing a specific country, it's harder for them to participate in discussions as well, especially in like the UN structure. And so that's another issue that made all of the policy discussions less accessible for the people who should have been able to be a part of them.
Can I ask a question? Last year when COP was supposed to happen, instead there were a couple of social media groups from Glasgow that put on some really interesting meetings. And the crux of the meetings was that Glasgow was built on the back of slaves. And that it basically was the conduit to the Americas of producing, but slaves, literally all the streets are named after all the slave owners. And that they were going to try to come out during the COP26 and have a presence. Did you see any presence of that blue collar working man and the idea of, you know, Blacks having been really in a bad situation in Glasgow throughout its history? Nothing.
No, I don't think we saw any of that, unfortunately.
That's interesting. I saw you did a live stream from the conference where you were interviewing two people from countries that are endangered by rising seas. And that was very interesting. Do you want to just say something about that in case folks didn't see that?
Yeah, actually the two interview the people that are here right now. But Lily and Ali interviewed a young woman from, I believe, Seychelles and a young man from Panama. And they talked about what it was like being youth activists from countries that were so underrepresented in the conference and that were so heavily impacted by climate change. And I thought that it was really heart-wrenching to hear the stories about just how threatened their lives and livelihoods were on these places that were just so heavily impacted by rising sea levels and increased storms. So I thought that that was really upsetting to see, but I feel like it opened my eyes more, especially being there. Like I knew how bad in theory climate change was, but meeting those people who had these stories about how it had hurt their lives and how it had hurt everyone around them was just really heart-wrenching. And I think that it really gave me more of a personal, deeper understanding, I guess, in that sort of sense of just how bad the climate crisis is.
Did you you talk to a lot of other young people from other countries? Are you going to stay in touch with any of them? And did you learn or get ideas from them?
Yeah, Lily and I made a group chat with a friend that we made on the first day, and we're still in touch with her. And there was trading of Instagram handles, and there's another group chat of all the people who attended a youth meeting for climate activists. So we'll definitely stay in touch with everyone. And I do think there was a lot of sharing of different goals and values. I definitely learned a lot just by talking to the other activists there. I heard some really interesting perspectives that changed the way I think about activism. And just knowing that all these people exist and even seeing their interests and what they post and about climate activism, I think gave me a better world sense of global activism.
Was there any way for the indigenous people who were there to be represented either through the country where they're living, or were they just totally shut out?
I'm actually not entirely sure. I don't know if you know, Charlotte.
I do not know. No, I didn't see that many indigenous people there either. So I think that they were mostly shut out. The only time I really saw indigenous people was at protests.
When you interviewed the delegate from Tonga, did you learn anything about his country and how they're impacted by climate?
We learned a lot about them. I think that was one of the reasons why all five of us were like particularly moved by that conversation or interview, because it was very personal. He was the only delegate at COP from Tonga, and so it was like literally a one-of-a-kind perspective. And it was the most in-depth and like personal account I've ever gotten of how these like Pacific Islands are being impacted by sea level rise. I think we hear a lot about sea level rise, but I don't know how much I necessarily knew about how people are, like how just individual families are affected. I mean, you can guess, but it's something different to hear the stories firsthand. And so, yeah, I definitely feel like I learned a lot about just the personal effects of sea level rise. And he was also talking about, we went to see like a presentation that he did about architecture and sort of the intersection between architecture and mitigating sea level rise, and how these like sort of elevated buildings are being constructed. And so that was also something totally new that I had never heard about, that I learned about from him, which was also really interesting.
Were there any standout speakers that you heard?
My standout speaker is easily Al Gore. Not even, yeah, not even as like a biased climate reality person. Because I went with Sophie, who isn't a climate reality leader, and he was both of our favorite speakers. He was like, it really was the best presentation I've ever seen. Like it was so, so good.
Good in terms of content, or did he show a lot of passion and but sometimes he doesn't.
Yeah,
he doesn't.
I think probably more of the content and also the audience, like I was talking about before. I don't know. I mean, like he was a good presenter, like he knew what he was talking about. He was very articulate. I don't know how passionate necessarily he was, but I think there was just a lot of like emotion and passion in the room, which he might have sort of been feeding off of. But I feel like, yeah, it was like a whole all-encompassing immersive experience. It was great.
Do you know if there's a recording of that anywhere?
I don't know. If there was, I would totally watch it again, but I just don't know.
Would it be under the one of the other speeches? Because I shared a link to all the recordings that were listed.
He was like the keynote for that speech, and it was like 90 minutes, so it wouldn't have been under anything else other than his name, I don't think.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions that I have missed? There's a bunch of them here.
I have a question that's a little tiny bit different, and that is, I wanted to get at some of the things that happened at the demonstrations. Were there, you mentioned speakers there. I'm kind of curious who spoke at the demonstrations and how did the messages maybe differ from what was inside versus what was outside?
I didn't go, but Charlotte did, so.
Yes. It was really interesting to hear the speeches because there were like 2 hours of speeches after the march, which was really cool because it made time to hear a lot of different voices and opinions, which I thought was really impactful. Like they made sure to include people from all around the world, and especially people from the global south. And because of that, the messages were entirely different what we were hearing inside the conference. And there was a lot of people talking about basically just the need to put more pressure on governments to not only say the right things, but do the right things. I know like something that Greta has recently become known for was her phrase, no more blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Because now, you know, everyone's caught on to like what we want, and they're saying that they're going to do these things.
I guess we've lost her. Okay, Annie.
The conference.
Are you
so
back, Charlotte?
Oh, was I breaking up?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
You were talking about Greta and the blah, blah, blah.
Oh, yeah.
And then
So I was saying Okay, so I was saying basically, a lot of people followed that same sentiment of no more blah blah blah, and they were saying that countries need to not only do the right, need to not only say the right things, but also to do the right things. And then I also said that there were a lot of people that spoke who were from the global south and who were from countries that were most impacted by the climate crisis. So that was another place where I heard a lot of personal stories about how they had to flee their homes and things like that. And I even heard about some people who were from countries. I heard some activists from Colombia who talked about how Colombia was the most dangerous country to be an environmental activist because they were getting killed. So that was really disturbing. So I think it was definitely the most and best opinions on the climate crisis that I've heard.
Was there, one question is, was there an option for country delegates to participate virtually, or did you have to be there to be there?
I don't know if delegates could participate virtually, but everyone else could participate virtually. I just don't know because the delegation stuff is a little more like official. But they had a lot of live streamed events. A lot of the panels and stuff were live streamed, so you could participate virtually as like an attendee. I just don't know about the delegates because it's a little more like.
Did they require vaccinations? Was the pandemic one reason that some smaller countries weren't able to be there?
They didn't. Oh, wait.
I believe they did require vaccinations.
They didn't require vaccinations, but the problem was that if you weren't vaccinated, you had to arrive in Scotland and quarantine for 2 weeks before you attended the conference. If you weren't vaccinated, you still had to show proof of a negative test every day. But yeah, that was where the issue came in, because people coming from poorer countries who might not have access to vaccines can't necessarily, anyone can't necessarily afford to take 2 additional weeks off of work or away from their family or whatever it may be to quarantine pre-conference, especially if you have to be staying in a hotel that whole time and ordering food and whatever. So the vaccine thing was an issue, not necessarily because they required the vaccines, but just because if you didn't have one, it made it an extra layer.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add on that countries that were from what they called red zones weren't allowed to go to Scotland. So basically these were the countries that had the highest like COVID populations. So that also was a big problem because that was what a lot of the countries were facing that didn't have access to vaccines. They had high COVID rates, so they couldn't attend. And I also believe they could not attend virtually. So that was really upsetting. Also, I have to go right now, but thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I'll leave it to Jelena.
Well, there's a lot of praise for all of you in the chat. I don't know if you've had a chance to check it, but
yeah, I've had it open.
Can I ask Jelena one more question?
Yeah, any more questions?
When Scotland got COP, they predicted that they would be sustainable by the time they hosted the conference. And I'm sure COVID probably caused some problems with that. But did you notice stuff when you were walking around, like more bike lanes, or could you see the offshore windmills?
They were really good, I'd say anyway, from what I saw in terms of their sustainability. All the buses were electric, which was cool. And they had like a really robust public transit system. There were like more buses than cars. And yeah, bike lanes, and then a lot of like compostable takeout containers and compostable anything, straws and whatever. So yeah, I think it did, like, it felt noticeably more sustainable than Chicago feels, I'd say.
I have a question.
Yeah.
okay.
So the global south, as we know, is so in need of assistance, is so vulnerable from a, climate perspective in all respects. Did you get any sense that the wealthier countries, if you will, were truly committed to aiding the global South to the degree that they claim over the last few years they intend to, such that the global South will not be left in the lurch as climate change continues to rear its ugly head?
I think the hard part of that question is truly committed. I do think that, wealthier countries have made commitments to help fund climate adaptation and climate mitigation in poorer countries. Whether they really want to or how positively they feel about it is maybe irrelevant if these poorer countries are receiving the funding that they need and the wealthier countries are following through on the agreements and the commitments that they've made. Obviously, it would be fantastic if their hearts were in the right place, but a lot of the times they aren't. So I feel like truly committed, maybe not, but I do feel like there's definitely some commitment. I went to a panel on climate financing, which was interesting because I've never felt inclined to attend any sort of panel on financing before, but it was what was available. So there I was. And I learned a lot more about the financing side of things than I have before. And that was a lot of what they were talking about, like the fact that the countries that are going to be hit hardest by the effects of climate change first are the ones who can't afford to deal with it right now. And there is sort of like a global fund that the UN is facilitating that wealthier countries are contributing to that is then being doled out to the countries that need the money. So I don't know. I feel like there is, I feel semi-optimistic on that front, but I also don't want to be too hopeful because I don't want to be naive or wrong.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate it. I wasn't really referring to the emotional aspect of their, I was really referring to their follow through on commitment, financially speaking, the hundreds of billions of dollars in aid over the next X years.
I think I trust that the wealthier countries are going to follow through on those commitments. I mean, I can't say whether they actually will, but from what I was hearing, it sounded like those were pretty well set. Wow,
that's encouraging.
Yeah, hopefully. I don't want to say that and then later be wrong.
I understand.
But
I understand.
I feel
That's
fairly good about that.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Joanna, how many high schools are part of the It's Your Future group?
It's Our Future it used to be really only OPRF, and now it's OPRF plus Lilly School in Evanston, so it's just two.
I think and CPS actually.
There's sort of a weird, more can definitely join, they're looking for more members. The one guy from CPS who went to COP with us, I don't think he's attended any of the It's Our Future meetings, so I don't know how much he is an It's Our Future member. But it's also just been in the past year that it's been trying to expand beyond the Oak Park area. So they're trying to get more people from other schools. It just hasn't happened yet, I think, because of COVID and because it's hard to get the word out.
Yeah, somebody just asked, can other schools join if they're interested?
Yeah, so they definitely can.
And it's part of 7 Generations Ahead.
We're going to have a blog post. We'll have a contact information on how to join. Should go up on our website in the next day or so. It's from Rachel Rosner, who was a chaperone on the trip.
Okay, well, thank you very much. You really gave us a sense of what it was like for you there. And we expect great things of you girls in the future. You've got a real leg up on some of your fellow Americans who haven't had that experience. So bravo and thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you.